Welcome to Once a Nurse with Leanne Meyer. And guess what? I'm Leanne Meyer, your host. So, those of you who've known me and followed me since 2017 when I started this podcast know how passionately I feel about nurses and nursing. Some of that has played out through my connection with powerupnursing.com, which is what sponsors this podcast now, with my colleagues, Tanya Abreu and Dr. Alba Rodriguez, who I have tremendous respect and appreciation for. One thing that I feel very strongly is that this is the moment for nurses to take the lead in healthcare, particularly in prevention of disease and healing with nature when we do find ourselves ill. I'm convinced more every day that the more we advance, we have become advanced with technology and pharmacy, the more we need to look at our ancient roots and the remedies for healing and health. Few people are more prepared for this discussion than my guest today. Her journey to health is extraordinary and is one with which I can deeply relate. So please welcome today's guest, Jennifer Payer.
So excited to be here with you, Leanne, and to be a part of Power Up Nursing and now Once a Nurse. So thank you so much.
Yes, you're so welcome. Our last conversation was so exciting. It took me a while to come down. So I want to get right into this because you have so many things wonderful to say. And as I alluded to here in the introduction, I'd like you to tell how you came along this journey to get to where you are now, because it is definitely not a normal journey.
Not normal.
Yeah.
I've done that my whole life. You're not
unique.
Normal.
Let's just call it unique.
Yes.
Leave it at that.
Yes.
Tell us all about what you want to tell us of how you got here.
Yeah, let me just share a little bit about my background. So I was a very gregarious, outgoing tomboy as a child. And I would say there wasn't a tree I didn't climb, a creek I didn't crawl into. I had a love of all things plants, all things animals. I even used to catch bees because I loved hearing the humming of the bees. I know.
Okay.
Very, very unique. But there, and now I know why many, many years later, the frequency of the buzzing of the bees is actually calms the nervous system.
I believe that.
Right. So many amazing things about nature. And then what happened was I went to college and I was really good in math. And so my mom kind of, steered me into the direction of math, even though I really wanted to be a doctor or a teacher. There were a lot of reasons why my parents said that wasn't a good idea. So I go into finance and I found myself at 22 years old, literally flying overseas very regularly every month on a plane, sitting under fluorescent lights and working long hours. For anybody who has any understanding of the corporate world, it wasn't unusual for me at a minimum to put in a 12-hour day, at a maximum up to 20 hours at points in my career. So needless to say, this young girl who was so connected to nature lost that connection. And I personally believe that that's what's going on in our world today, that we are losing this deep connection with nature and that nature is simply a reflection of us. And so that disconnect led me into two pretty serious health crises that kind of re-steered the course of my life and what I ended up doing as my mission.
Do you want to share some of the diagnosis maybe, because
Sure.
The people listening to this will have a medical background and that will be of interest to them of what your crises were?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was interested.
Yeah, so the first one happened in 2008. And at that point, I was traveling to Boston every week. I had a corporate apartment, 4 kids at home. And so I know that many of the women here can relate to that mom guilt, right? So when I traveled, it was like I gave everything I had so that when I came home on Thursday nights, I could then give everything I had to my family. Needless to say, I had nothing in the tank for me. I ended up with pneumonia, tachycardia, bronchitis, shingles, mono, and that was the second time that had been diagnosed with mono in a 2-year period. And then finally the doctor said, okay, you've got chronic fatigue. And the fascinating thing about all of that, which is something that I've gone deep on in my own healing journey, is what was it in me? I had lymph nodes the size of golf balls. And yet, I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep going, and I keep going. And so it really was overriding the messages that my body was very clearly giving me.
Yes.
And that health crisis, 4 years later, led me to a diagnosis of DCIS, so ductal carcinoma in situ. And that's when I took a big pause and stepped away from the corporate world after, 29 years, almost 30 years in that environment. And for 3 years, life was grand. I had a healing practice. That '08 crisis led me deep into the healing arts. And so I started consuming as much as I could about natural healing and really trying to understand how to bridge the two worlds, right, of the allopathic and kind of the Eastern model. And I stepped back and said, okay, this is like an a la carte. We have so many things available to us for healing. And I wanted to know what all those things were.
And that we had no idea. I mean, they have been out there and available for centuries, millennia. And yet, because we became so scientific and so proud of ourselves and arrogant, we wouldn't look at what our ancestors knew and used to great benefit in years past.
Yeah, and in my own research, what I discovered is that archaeology shows us at least 60,000 years ago, plants were being used as medicine, right? And then you can follow the Chinese and the Egyptians and all that. So they've been around forever as a modality. And yes, we've kind of lost our way with what our ancestors brought to us. And we have a tendency to go either or. Mm-hmm. Right. And so a big part of my healing was, wait a minute, there is no either or. I have all these options, and what will I choose?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so for 3 years, my life was in balance, and the, calcified cells in my breast pretty much stayed into place. I was actively monitoring. And then something interesting happened. I had an old boss call me up and ask me to come back into a corporate job. And, for some reason, my mind made up this story that, oh, there must be something left for me in corporate to complete. And so I jumped all in, and I started in May. And in August, 3 months later, I had stage 4 cancer that had metastasized in my liver and in my lymph nodes.
My feeling is always, if we don't listen to our body, it will speak a little louder, and sometimes a lot louder.
Yes, I call that my 2x4 moment. I got the loving 2x4. Hey, it's really time for you to step out of this environment and step into the one that you are meant to be, to be in.
So what it brought you to eventually then was plants. And how did that come about? You had that connection as a child. And here's one thing I absolutely believe too, is that whatever we came into this world as a mission, even if we go off in the wrong direction, somehow or another, there will be, detours that take us back to where maybe we were supposed to be in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. So that first health crisis in '08 led me to the study of plants in 2 ways. I started working with essential oils, and I have a huge love of essential oils because I think they are amazing in bringing balance, especially to the nervous system. And then I studied for 2 years with the 13 Indigenous grandmothers. And that was a group of women, a very magical story about 13 women from all over the world that came together. And they all knew that they were going to come together at some point. And one of my mentors in the program I was in actually got on a plane and flew all over the world. And when the grandmother opened the door, she said, I've been waiting for you. I knitted 13 shawls, or I made 13 rosaries, or whatever it was. They all had this number 13, and they all knew. So prophecy, whatever you want to call it. And their mission, they each have their own mission. But their mission collectively has been for world peace, and it's called Healing for the Next 7 Generations.
Yes.
So that we can bring
that is my Buddhist tradition too, that we can heal 7 generations back and 7 generations forward.
Absolutely. So exactly the same mission that the grandmothers have. And so I really got reconnected to plants. And again, going back to this uniqueness, I actually can sit with a plant and I can communicate with it. So when I'm working with people, I have a healing practice now. And when I work with people, I can sit in front of somebody and the plants will tell me which ones will help the person, which is really a beautiful gift that, in reconnecting with the plants through meditation, I've opened up that channel. And so in 2019, my cancer marker started going back up, and it's not unusual to have a reoccurrence. Mm-hmm. And while I had addressed my immune system, I really had not addressed the toxicity that my body was still holding.
So just to back up a little bit, so when you realized that the cancer had become manifest again, did you go through the usual pharma, chemo, all of that stuff? You didn't. Okay.
I did not. No, I was really, to me, it was such a journey of coming back to that little girl that was connected to nature. And so I really started looking to plants for healing. And it just so happened I was visiting a friend and her husband was a doctor, and he came out with, this is what it looks like, came out with this tincture. Mm-hmm. This is what it looks like. And
tell me what that one is. I couldn't read the label.
This one is called linden tree. It sits on my desk because it's the best plant for the nervous system, especially with children.
Okay.
So the Latin name is Tilla tomatosa.
Tilla tomatosa. I will certainly remember that for about 3.5 seconds.
Otherwise known as the silver linden tree.
Okay, there you go. That might be easier.
So he came out with this tincture, and I was interested. I said, "Oh, that's great." And as soon as he told me what it was, when he said it was embryonic plant stem cells, I didn't even know what those words meant. I just had a very physical, visceral reaction where I had tingles all over my body. And I knew in that moment I needed to know something. I didn't know what. But I said, how can I find out more? And how do you spell that? What is this?
Right. Let me write this down.
Yeah. And so, I believe that as we come back to who we are, who we were at birth and who we are meant to be, that's where the doorways open and the universe supports us and it aligns, right? And so
let's go into the plant stem cells. I did sort of the same thing you did. It's like plant stem cells. I knew about human stem cells, but it never occurred to me that other, living organisms would also have stem cells. That's perhaps maybe one of the foundation building blocks.
Yes. So plant stem cells come from the new growth on the plant in the springtime. And so if you go outside in the springtime, if you have a maple tree, all those little buds that are on the plant, those buds, they contain several things. They contain the entire genetic makeup of the plant, right? So that bud hasn't become a leaf. It hasn't become part of the bark. It hasn't become a rootlet. It hasn't become a shoot off the tree. So it holds the entire potential of the plant, very similar to human stem cells. And in that form, they contain something called juvenile phytohormones, just means baby hormones. And those hormones do several things. They clean up the toxicity in the body through the cells, the tissue, and the organs. They bring the extracellular matrix back online, and that's our communication in the body, right? Our ECM is the network and the fascia and all of that. So it brings all of that back into coherence. And then the third thing they do is they actually revitalize and rejuvenate things that have broken down in the body. So very different than adult plants. So an adult plant has...
Before you go further, I want to just check with you to be sure. So this is the bud that will turn into leaves generally. It's not the seed that they're putting out, because the seed is what I originally, when I first heard you, I was thinking, well, it must be the seed, but then you kept saying the bud. So I wanted to clarify between those two.
Yeah, so the bud is literally that little bud before it opens up on the tree.
Okay.
And most of the plant stem cells come from trees. There are a few, like bramble, which is the blackberry bush. So some do come from bushes. And something like a dandelion actually comes from the new rootlets on the dandelion plant.
Okay.
But I would say 90% of them are actually coming from the buds of the trees.
Okay. So did you say everything you wanted to? I interrupted you.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Wasn't sure if you wanted to go on to how is this different from, I mean, there's a cajillion adult herbals out there, that we hear about constantly. And, we keep getting sold, promoted, marketed to for these things. And it's so hard to know, is there value in all of these different things? Where did they come from? How do you research them to really know, is it something valuable? So how is it different?
Yeah, and I believe that every modality has its place in our healing. There are two analogies I use. The first one is when you see a newborn baby, right? They've got so much light in their eyes. They're full of life force energy. Their skin is soft and supple, right? That is how I would describe the buds of these trees. And then you look at us, as we age, we become more weathered. Things start to, break down in our bodies. And so the same is true about plants. So an adult plant is going to accumulate heavy metals from the soil even over time, whether things are being sprayed or not, right? Whether pesticides or herbicides. So they're going to be more worn down, and they really focus on the physical body. Okay. And they can come from anywhere. So unfortunately, we do have a lot of plants that are sprayed. A lot of the adult herbals are not well cared for. The other analogy I use is if you look at something like broccoli. Broccoli is a very, very healthy food for us. But if you look at the broccoli sprout, if you look at the new growth when the broccoli is in its sprouting form, it contains something called sulforaphane, which is one of the best enzymes to stop cancer growth in the body. And
Wow.
there are all kinds of PubMed studies on sulforaphane. So adult broccoli doesn't have that. So I would say that's the equivalent of these juvenile phytohormones, these enzymes, these unique properties that in that new stage of growth exist that dissipate as the plant grows. So you don't get all of that goodness as the plant ages. That's not to say adult herbals aren't great, because they're amazing, especially if you know where they come from. But they have just that affinity.
To have organic again, because I think about, I've been growing in my deck, a deck garden, and realizing that I'm buying seeds from, Walmart, various places, and it's possible that those seeds might not be organic. And so am I
And
buying
could be
something?
genetically modified too, right?
Yeah,
Which is
right.
another challenge we're having as a human species right now. Yeah.
So,
So I
how,
just want to add one more thing, Leanne, if I
sure,
may.
okay,
The
sure.
other magical thing about these that is different than the adult herbal is they also have a very strong energetic component. So if you're familiar with homeopathy, right? Homeopathy is very diluted, but it still keeps the blueprint of that plant, or that where it's pulling the pellets from, or the blueprint from. And for the plant stem cells, they have that energetic impact on the body as well. So they're giving you energy. And, let's face it, a lot of us are dealing with fatigue and things like that.
Yes. So it comes back to what you were talking about, the bees also, that, innately you knew that you wanted to listen to those bees. And now with the learning and knowledge you've gained, there is a level of, what would you call it?
It's a
Energy
frequency. Yeah,
frequency.
energetic frequency.
Right. That is the perfect frequency for some type of healing. So you knew that on some intuitive level. And so that's what is there in plants also. This is something that I started to tell you the other day, last night, I guess it was, when we were talking, and Celestine Prophecy was the book that I was talking about, that introduced to me, I'm sure other people knew about it, but I sure didn't, somewhere in the 90s, the concept that everything in nature is giving off energy and a frequency that we can pick up with our bodies and can be healed. The only thing I knew is that since growing up in a small town, I was always most comfortable, most happy, most settled when I was out in the woods or walking around a lake or, doing those kinds of things that were very natural. And because it was a small town of 2,000 people, I could go 2 blocks and I was out in nature.
Yes. Yeah, there's a wonderful book called The Last Child in the Woods, and this the author Richard Love actually coined the term nature deficit disorder, NDD. And what he says is that we have lost our connection to nature for 2 reasons. One is, if you look back 70 years, 50 years, most people were farmers. They were outside, right? Or they were doing construction or carpentry. So they were out in nature, and we've all kind of gravitated toward inside jobs, right? Under fluorescent lights, going back to that, which affects our frequency. So that's one thing that's happened. The other thing is technology. So while technology has helped us advance on so many levels, we pick up these things 1,000 times a day, right? And we are on technology. And so when I look at my children's generation, it was a strong push to get them outside, but the propensity is, I'd rather be on my phone and be connected to social media and to my friends versus being outside playing kickball or, whatever.
With your friends.
Yes, with our friends.
Mm-hmm.
So we've kind of lost that connection, and he does a beautiful job. And then the other term that he uses is knowledge deficit disorder. And our ancestors knew where their food came from.
Yes.
And we don't, right? We are the only country in the world that can eat whatever we want at any point in the season versus, when I've traveled to Europe, you can only get what is available. Mm-hmm. Right. But we import food from all over. And so that has impacted us, is not understanding where our food comes from.
Okay. So these are all very important. So talk about these buds. Are you, these buds are the essence, the core of the business that you now have. So out of, learning all that wonderful business knowledge and experience in the bank and on and on and on, you now can apply it in a more healthy way. So the basis of that are these buds. Where do the buds come from?
So they all come from the wild in the Italian Alps. And literally, you can imagine walking into a forest. So it's not cultivated like a garden. I know. I'm like, I love the forest. Forest bathing, that's a whole nother conversation. But literally, to your right, you might see a silver fir tree, and to your left, you might see, like a mountain pine. And so literally, there's a group of families who go around and pick those buds. And there's a complete intentional process, because first they have to map what trees are where. And so they map this whole thing out. It takes about a month. And then they have to go check and see when those buds are actually ready, because once the bud starts to open, you're beginning to lose some of those healing properties. So they have to pick the buds when they're closed and on the trees. And what I love, because of my respect for nature, is they never pick more than 20% of the buds from any one plant. Because
that would mean that there are birds and animals who are also picking some of those buds. However, between all of them, there still is a lot that's left that can help the plant continue to grow and be nurtured itself.
Yes, and we put in a whole forecast every year, because if we run out of something, we can't get it until next spring, right? Until it's been picked and macerated. So once the bud is picked, it's macerated in organic grape alcohol. You typically need alcohol or vinegar to basically pull the plant properties, the healing properties out of the plant. Those are really the only 2 ways.
And I'm going to bet that my friend Tanya Abreu is going to be wanting that to be muscadine grapes.
Yeah. Well, it's grape alcohol. We don't use grain alcohol because of the genetic modification in many of the grains. And so, it's really just the grape alcohol, organic, and the organic glycerin. The plant buds soak for about 30 days. And then the plant material is scooped out. It's smushed and pressed. And then it's burned in a hot oven. It's about 800 degrees Fahrenheit. So hot, 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 hot. And then that ash is put back into the liquid and it's spiralized. So it's spiralizing 1,000 times a day.
So now it's actually technology that's coming into the ancient
Yeah.
knowledge that we've had. And maybe even this technology is what was done for centuries.
Yeah, because Dr. Canillo, who runs the company that does all this for us, he was using the old devices. It almost looked like a time, what are those, the sand where you do it?
Yes.
Two
Yes.
bulbs on each side, and he would
Yeah.
tape them and put them on the roof. And the heat from the sun would create that. And after about 20 years, he said, there's got to be an easier way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, about 10, 15 years ago, he actually designed a machine to mimic what nature is doing,
Mm-hmm.
so that he could do it in a faster, do it more, more quickly.
Okay, so one of the questions that comes to mind for me is that most of us, I grew up in a farming community, and the whole time I was growing up, my mother always had a garden, and so we could go out and pull out a carrot and have a carrot, and they were the best with the dirt on them. Yet the best.
Oh. Everything for your immune system.
Right, but what we know is that the farther you get away from the dirt to the table, the less energy there is in that plant, and maybe healing abilities. So when they are taking these buds and going through this maceration process, how do they maintain the energy and the frequency that's in that plant?
Yeah, so that spiraling process is doing that. That technique that I mentioned with the burning and putting the ash in, that's called spagyrics. And what they've been able to see under a microscope is that within somewhere between 8 and 20 minutes, taking the product actually lights up the cell, and they can see it under a microscope, which is pretty fascinating. But once it's bottled, that energy and that frequency stays in there. And the organic grape alcohol and glycerin keep it active. So there's a 5-year expiration date according to the FDA. These are regulated by the FDA. But in Italy, they have to keep them for 8 years to conform to the goods manufacturing process. And they retest it every year after the 5 years. And so we do know after 8 years, all of the active principles of those plants are still intact.
Wow. So, okay, this is a new thing to me, that the FDA has known about this for how long?
At least 30 years.
Okay, how come I'm just learning about this now? I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 50 years. How come I never heard of it before?
Yeah, I think part of it is the intentionality to do this. We've been asked, why can't you do this in the US? Well, first of all, there's no forest at any spot in the US that I'm aware of where all of these plants exist like they do in the Italian Alps. So to get something like bilberry, which is wild blueberry, you'd have to go up to the Northeast. To get like lemon tree, which is the bark from the lemon, you wouldn't be getting it up in the Northeast. You'd be getting it in Florida or in California. So we literally would have to have facilities all over the US to be able to do this. So I think that's part of it, of why we haven't heard about it, because they're not made here in the US. There are about 5 companies in the world, and they're all in Europe.
So what happens when I take this, and how do I take it? Is a tincture what you showed in the bottle? They're all tinctures?
There is. So they're a tincture, and you can take them one of 2 ways. You can take them straight in your mouth and hold it in your mouth like many other tinctures for a few seconds, and then take some water, or you can put them directly in a small amount of water.
Okay.
So you can take them either way. And what happens in the body is it's a very, very gentle process. So we are conditioned to have a headache, go take an aspirin, headache's gone in 30 minutes. So part of it is educating that when you're working with plants, plants are designed to bring homeostasis, any plants actually. But these in particular, that's one of their specialties. And so it takes time. If we've had a chronic illness like diabetes, I mean, it could take, 6-7 months before that could start to resolve by using these. So they're very, very gentle. And you take it, and I started noticing a difference within about 2 months. I think I shared with you, Leanne, that my cancer markers were starting to raise, and I saw on blood work my cancer markers come back down. And this was the only thing that I did to change that. I didn't add any other supplements in. So you can look at it through blood work, but I always gauge of how do people feel. If somebody is tired or they have brain fog and they've been taking these for a couple of months, I want to know, is the brain fog better? Are you more aware, have clarity of mind? So that's what I look for, is how do people start to feel? And then I'm trust but verify that I want to see it in the labs in one way or shape or form.
Well, I'm about to be one of your guinea pigs because just before this, I had an assessment for, whether I'm in early Alzheimer's. And I've been experiencing brain fog for at least the last 4 years, and probably a little longer, where it was maybe not quite as obvious, but it got to the point where it was very obvious, couldn't miss it. And so I'll be very interested to see how that all works.
Yeah, your package shipped out this morning. So
yes, thank you. So I do want to get into how can I find out more about this? Obviously, I know I'm connected to you, and I think Tanya has just put on the screen here your business.
Yeah, so we are a practitioner-based company. I think one of the questions that Tanya had posted was, what illnesses or imbalances do these work with? I mentioned to you, plants have an affinity for organs in the body and for systems in the body. You have plants like mountain pine and Virginia creeper that are great for the musculoskeletal system, for example. Hawthorn is good for the heart and the cardiovascular system. So every plant, we have about 100 single plants. So they really cover every imbalance that I work with: gut issues, brain issues, musculoskeletal issues. They're good for pain. Obviously, I use them working through cancer cells that were still kind of popping back up in my body. So they really do work with everything. And we even have veterinarians and herbalists who work only with animals who are using these with pets too. So that's great. But as I was saying, we're a practitioner company. So we work with nurse practitioners, RNs, medical doctors, and we also work with homeopaths and chiropractors and integrative and functional medicine. So, and my goal, big part, what we talked about, is I love to meditate, and I got a very clear message that part of my role was to bring these out to the world. You asked the question, Leanne, how come I haven't heard about these? In my research, I traced them back to St. Hildegard of Bingen, who was considered the first naturopath. In 1158, she wrote a book about the buds of 8 trees, right? And then 800 years, nothing, no research anywhere. And then it popped back up in 1958. So why did that happen? I don't know. Maybe what was going on, on the planet then. But since 1958, you can start to see the research and the medical and the books that came on and things like that. So, my mission is to educate, to get this modality out there. It's a very, very gentle modality. Most of the people that take this, I think I know 2 in the 5 years that I've been working with these plants have had a Herx reaction. And they were super, super sensitive. So, having that kind of like, oh, I got a headache when I took it. Only 2 people that I've ever known of.
Say what a Hertz, did you say Hertz reaction?
Yeah, Herx reaction. So when you take something and you kind of get a detox reaction, because they are detoxing and cleaning up the toxic load in the body. But again, it's so gentle. I've used these with babies before that had a reaction to food. So they're very, very
interact or have like side effects like we think of with pharmacology. They start with something natural and then they add 16 zillion different chemicals to the point that, who knows what's working off of one another. And then they still keep treating symptoms instead of what's at the base of things.
Right. Yeah. So these do not have any contraindications, which I love about it. So that's one of the beautiful things. They work really well. And I work with clients who come in who are on pharmaceuticals, and I will add this in to help. support them, and eventually, in many cases, they can get off the pharmaceuticals. I
So
have
in
an
addition to owning the company, you are also a practitioner yourself.
yes, and
Okay.
I'm
And
also a user. So I still take many of them just to keep all of the systems in my body clean.
what was the training? We didn't really go into that made you knowledgeable and able to do this kind of practitionership.
Yeah, I had a week-long immersion training in Hawaii back in 2019, but I would say it's my connection to the plants that really started me really bringing the information to me,
Okay.
and then working with them.
I think
For my
you mentioned to me that you have such a deep curiosity about things, and so you do a lot of research on your own. What makes you feel confident that the research you're doing is with people that you can trust? Because there's a lot of information out there that we know is not trustworthy at all.
Yeah, I am intuitive, and let's put that aside for a minute. I do the research, and then I want to know who funded the research. As a banker, we had this saying, "Follow the money," and you can make data look any which way. So I want to know, where did the study come from? Who funded it, and what is the intention of the study? If the intention of the study is just educating people, and somebody's not trying to sell something behind the scenes,
Correct.
I trust it. And then I always take it into meditation and get still to just say, what in here is true that I can learn from and apply in my own life.
Okay. Um, I had just had a thought and it went right scooting through my brain and out. Um, we're kind of coming to the end here, and I want you to think, if there was one thing you wanted nurses and practitioners that'll be listening to this to remember, what is the one thing you want them to know?
First, we'd love to have you as part of our community, because this is about educating and about exactly what you said in the beginning about moving into a new paradigm, right? We're moving into a new paradigm on the planet. And I believe exactly what you said, Leanne, that nurses are at the forefront of that. They've been in the trenches and, pulled out and coming forward. And so what I would want everyone to know is that, plants are just another modality. The plant stem cells are another way to help lead that paradigm shift and take ancient plant wisdom and modern healing and bring those two together.
Mm-hmm.
And to move us out of this either or paradigm that we've been living in, is it's this or it's this. No, it's all of it. And how do we bring the synergy and the unity together so we can utilize and work with the things that are going to work best for the human body and for the spirit?
Two things just came back into my brain. So data, are you collecting data based on the people you're selling to and the results that they're getting? Or is this company that's back in the Italian Alps doing something with that, Dr.
Hello. Yeah, we have started to, and I have a practitioner in Minnesota that I agreed to fund 10. So I don't know if you know Dr. Dan McDonald, but I agreed to fund 10 of his patients. And we did a full genetic panel through New Amsterdam Genomics, which is one of the largest genetic companies. We gave them one of the plant stem cells and then did a full genetic panel after. And I am still looking for a place to take those 10 into 1,000, because what we saw is gene mutations like MTHFR literally fell out of their genetic panel. So
I have a couple of ideas for you that we can talk about
okay,
later.
I'm ready.
The other thing that comes to my mind is how do we protect this precious resource? We know that greed has destroyed so much of our planet that was healthy and growing and positive influence for us. And now we have like these blue zones where there's small places around the world where people are still having this effect of health long into their older age. So how do we protect the Italian Alps?
I don't know. That's a good question. What I have seen is It's sacred land. Nothing gets sprayed over it. And I think the stewards of that land are pretty spectacular people who are connected to nature and have a desire to keep everything in balance. And so I trust them implicitly. And if you don't know this, the Italian Alps are essentially co-ops of families that own different parts of the Italian Alps.
I didn't know that.
Very different concept from what we're used to.
So I trust those people. Who I don't trust is governments, and governments that change on a regular basis, and especially governments that come in with greed as a focal point. So that's a whole nother show that we could talk about. But so what makes you most hopeful for the future? Maybe we can end with that.
What makes me hopeful is communities of people like the nurses here and some of the professionals that I work with that are all shifting back to the old way of being, which is really about healing and getting out of that greed modality and coming into first do no harm. To me is so important and so critical to our survival as a species, is to come back to nature, come back to what we know. And, you know, people ask me, what can I do to heal? I'm like, go spend 10 minutes in the sun. When you get up in the morning, it will set your circadian rhythm. It will help your nervous system.
Walk on the grass, walk in the
Yes.
water.
Yes, put your bare feet on the grass. So, you know, what I'm most hopeful about is people are waking up. I think the beauty of COVID is it brought us back to our roots. And that's what I'm most hopeful about, is that we are going to move forward with our ancestors behind us, and have goosebumps as I say that. Those 7 generations behind are coming 7 generations forward for all of us to come back to our divine, whole, healed selves.
Jen, this is a perfect place to stop. I could not agree with you more. This is what has given me hope in the last particular 4 years, where I'm realizing how many thousands and hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of people around the world are coming to the same conclusion at the same time. I don't think it's coincidental.
No,
Thank you
it's
for what
a divine blueprint.
Let's stay connected. I hope everyone listening to this will connect with you. I will definitely be letting nurse practitioners and other people that I'm connecting with know about what you're doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Such an honor and such an amazing group of people. So grateful.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you who are listening to this program. And I hope that you will come back and listen to us again. I want to also thank my producer, is Tanya Abreu, who without her, this would not be possible.